Today, I'm going to give you guys the top 50 DBD survivor tips to help improve your gameplay. I'll start with the most basic things that you need to do before the game, during, and after, and toss in some really advanced tips, so make sure you're sticking around till the very end because those are where the most advanced tips are. We're going to feature the best perks, add-ons to use, how to loop specific tiles, how to flashlight save, and every single tech that you can think of. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Always run a good loadout before even starting the match. A lot of times I actually forget to do this, so make sure your perks are pretty good, they have good synergy, and there's one exhaustion perk, and make sure that you're bringing an item with some good add-ons with that, as well as a good offering. There's no point in leaving any of these slots open, so drop some items in. There's absolutely no point to leaving any of these things vacant, so make sure you're filling up the spots. If you're a console player, I highly recommend that you separate your interactions button so it's not the same thing. You don't want to be mid-chase and end up grabbing an item off the ground when you're trying to vault, or you get stuck on a generator while you're trying to drop a pallet. So the sooner you do this and the sooner you get accustomed to it, the better it's going to be for your gameplay. We talked about some of the items and their add-ons, so here are some of the best medkits add-ons that I can possibly think for you. Here are some of the best toolbox add-ons in my opinion. Here are the best map add-ons that you could run if you actually want to run a map. You don't need to. It's not really the best item to bring into the game. And finally, one of the best items, if not the best items, is the flashlight. Here are the best items. I've mentioned it before, but make sure you're running good builds. Here are some builds that I think are really good depending on your playstyle. There's always improvements that can be made to these builds, but honestly, I think these fit these specific playstyles the best. In fact, as you can see, the one that says King is the one that I use the most personally, and I have a lot of fun with it because it's super well-rounded. Make sure you're prioritizing leveling up survivors to at least Prestige 1 to get yourself all the perks on your characters. This is an easy way to make sure you can have any type of build and a lot of versatility, dump in the points in some characters, slowly level up. Once you get everyone to Prestige 1, go to your main character and chuck out all those levels so you can get every single perk in the game at max level. If you are struggling to level everybody up, you can go ahead and actually level up specific characters with good perks. Admittingly, there's a lot of survivors in the games where their perks are quite useless. So I've actually made a chart for you guys where I think these are the best survivors that you should prioritize leveling up or even purchasing. Once you get those down, you can go ahead and level everybody else up, or if you choose not to, then you don't even need to do that as well. Don't forget to actually select a challenge and look at your daily challenges as well. Every single time I play DBD, I forget to select a challenge and I'm like, oh man, and I forget to look at my daily challenges, and these are just extra quick blood points that you can obtain, so make sure you're doing that. When you're in game, you're going to see a lot of different status effects. I'm talking about tons of them, and sometimes you might not know what they do. So here's every single status effect icon and exactly what they do in game and how that applies to you. When you first spawn into the trial, it's best to quickly go and start working on a generator. If you're with someone, continue working on that generator with them, but ideally, it's best to split up and work on generators. If 4 different survivors are working on 4 different generators and the killer comes through 1 person, that's still 3 generators that potentially can get popped if the killer 6 that survivor and they're pretty good at their job. If you want to play things safe when working on a generator, wait a few seconds until you hear heartbeat. If you do hear a heartbeat, just stay by your generator, don't touch it, because when the killer comes by and they listen to the audio cue and they don't hear that anyone's working on that generator, especially at the start of the game, they're not going to come back to that generator for a very, very long time, and this will potentially let you pop that one. If you're having any difficulties actually finding any of these generators, remember, they're really, really tall. Look up into the sky and you can see which generators need work. You can also know if these generators are actually completed based on if their lights are fully on. If they're on, don't go to it. That area has already been done. Whenever you've completed a generator, don't just rotate to the generator right next to it. Prioritize gens in the middle or generators that are further away from the one that you have done, because you don't want to 3-gen yourself in the end game. If there's a 3-gen, chances are you're going to lose that game, so don't just work on gens all willy-nilly. Be strategic with the gens that you're doing. Whenever you are working on a generator, it's good to have a bunch of different escape paths in mind. If you're running perks like Sprint Burst or any other exhaustion perk that can help you get distant, you can also utilize this. Every time I'm working on a generator, I'm thinking of at least 2 or 3 different ways to escape. If there's no way to escape, as soon as I hear heartbeat, I have to play it a little bit more stealthy, or else there won't be much that you can do. Now, every single trial you're going to play is going to be a little bit more unique. which means every single killer you're going to run into, they're going to be different. I actually have a full comprehensive guide based on some of the best players in the DBD scenes, including comp players, content creators, and gamers with thousands upon thousands of hours. They gave me their 3 best tips to how to play and counter every single killer. I'll leave those 2 videos in the description and on screen right now. This is a bit of an ironic one, but if you do want to get better at Survivor, once in a while, try Killer out. Maybe it's a tall task because it's completely different, it's in first person, but try 1 or 2 matches, see what it's visually like, so that way you can take comprehensive notes and then use that to aid your own gameplay. When I used the main Survivor and I swapped over to Killer, when I went back to Survivor, there was so much information that I learned, especially when it came down to pathing and stealth, that helped me significantly in my gameplay. If you're ever being chased by the killer, make sure that you're running to areas in the map where generators are already complete. No one's really going to be around this section, so it's the best place to run the killer. Drop whatever pallets you need in that area because no one's really going to be there. Speaking about dropping those pallets, avoid dropping too many of them in the same location and creating dead zones. Dead zones are spaces where there's absolutely no pallets whatsoever, and there's nothing that you can utilize to aid you in your fight. So make sure you're not just dropping every single pallet back to back to back, especially in high prime locations where generators are still yet to be repaired. Instead, drop a pallet, look for a good vault that can gain you more distance, and then move to a completely different tile far away, maybe leaving a few pallets in between and utilizing that one. Make sure that you're hugging walls as efficiently as possible when you're looping. You want to minimize the amount of distance that you're putting on these loops so the killer has a lot more progress to make up. If you're taking loops wide, you're giving the killer the advantage, so hug these loops very, very tightly to make sure you're maximizing the amount of distance that you're getting. I always see newer players struggling with this one, and even some veteran players to be honest, and that's looking behind you when you're running. Killers are oftentimes going to try to mind game you, and if you're not looking at their exact movements, you could run straight into them, especially when it comes down to type loops. You don't always have to do this. There's certain situations where you continue to run straight and it actually helps you out, but for the most part, when you're in tight loops and good chases, make sure you're looking back and keeping an eye on that killer. Like I said, holding that W key isn't too bad. You can look back and still hold that W key. Against specific killers, especially the slower moving ones, holding W is not actually a bad idea, especially killers that are going to try to mind game you or try to figure you out. Just run in a straight line, and sometimes that honestly does work. It really is not a bad idea. A big thing in the game is knowing the different type of pallets. Yes, all the pallets are the same, but their positioning will be different. These are called unsafe pallets, safe pallets, and god pallets. Unsafe pallets are pretty simple to spot out. They're the ones that have just 1 or 2 rocks around them, or maybe a tree, and it's a very tiny loop. These are pallets that typically you just want to run straight through and drop the pallet, and you don't necessarily want to loop them. You can in specific times, but for the most part, that's what you want to do. Then you have your more safe loops. These are the ones that typically come with a vault or have longer tiles that you can continue to run around for a couple of times. And then you have your god pallets, such as the Killer Shack pallet. Speaking about that Killer Shack pallet, you need to learn how to loop efficiently at the shack. You never really want to drop the shack pallet unless you really need to, because you can get so much wasted time there by just learning how to loop the shack. In the example in the background, I'm showing you some gameplay of just me looping the shack. I'm not the best at doing it, but I'm pretty decent when it comes down to it, and it still buys you a good amount of time, and then you can chain that in to some other loops. A good thing to keep in mind is when to pre-drop pallets and versus when to greet them. Sometimes you want to pre-drop the pallet if the killer is not respecting them whatsoever. If they're just walking straight through them and they're not hesitating, anticipating your drop, pre-drop those pallets. Especially in higher mobility killers as well, pre-dropping is not the worst idea. Oftentimes, if there's a lot of pallets on the map, pre-dropping can actually be beneficial. There's other times where you don't want to drop pallets early whatsoever, such as playing against a Leatherface. You rather stun them, you rather be tactical with your drops, because if you just keep chucking out the pallets, you're going to have no assets to use later. So use your own discretion to determine when to pre-drop and when to actually greed. If you're playing in a Swift, or even if you want to be just a little bit selfish, if you're on your death hook, for example, and your entire team still has not been hooked, and you're being chased, sometimes it's not the worst idea just to lead them to your team. I know this sounds really scummy, but remember, they still have a ton of hooks that they can give, and on top of that, if they're decent at looping and the killer decides to go for them, then that saves you from dying. One person dying will eventually just flunk the entire team anyways, and everybody in that ship is going to sink, so rather split the pain up rather than getting one person out of the game. And this goes the opposite way as well. If you see someone that's about to be on death hook, go and take a hit for them. Try to take chase for them. Be a good team player instead of thinking it's someone else's responsibility or it's their own thing. If you become selfish in your games and someone eventually dies, it becomes immensely more difficult for 3 players to beat a killer versus 4 players. If you're ever in chase and you end up getting hit, don't drop a pallet if it's immediately in front of you, especially if you're close to that pallet when you're getting hit, because you're getting a speed boost. You want to utilize the speed boost to gain as much distance as you possibly can and chain that to a different loop or a vault. If you just go ahead and drop the pallet, you're negating that speed boost, and it's super counterintuitive. If you're struggling with looping, the rule of thumb is to make sure that your pathing is for quick vaults and good pallet placement. You don't want to loop the opposite way where you're getting the slow vaults. Always keep this in mind. Killers are going to try to forcefully get you out of this rhythm, and if they do, make yourself useful. Go to another loop. Don't waste your time and get hit. Chain this together with other things, and always prioritize getting that fast vault. While you're looping at some of the tiles, make sure you're standing at checkpoints. Checkpoints are where you can stand where you're kind of safe. No matter which side the killer decides to mind game you on or which side they're coming from, you can hesitate for a few seconds to look around to see which way they're actually coming from and then continue along your way. If you just run the loops all willy-nilly, eventually the killer is going to mind game you, so use these checkpoints to your best advantage. In the example in the background, you're going to see some of these checkpoints. It's just tiles where you can see both sides of where the killer potentially could come from and still have enough time in order to make it safely to an area. A basic rule of thumb, don't run the edge map. There's not really a lot of pallets around there. Some of the newer maps now have them because they decide to toss in some random pallets, but they're super duper unsafe. Stay to the middle of the map or big structures. It's your best option. If someone's on a hook and they're dying, you don't actually need to save ASAP. In fact, it's oftentimes better to just stick on the gen if you're close to it, work on it, pop it, maybe even stop a generator from regressing, then getting that save, because most killers like going back to the hook and either looking for the person that decided to unhook or even tunnel, so keeping them there for a while isn't the worst idea ever. Know the distinction when you need to actually heal up versus when you need to do some gens. For example, if there's 1 generator left, there's 4 survivors, 1 person's being chased, don't go in the corner and start self-caring. Go work on that generator with some of the other folks. Make sure that generator's out the way, then worry about healing once that's done. You want to keep putting that pressure on the killer, snowball the pressure as much as you can, and if you're wasting your time healing, let's say you're healing against a legion, there's no point in doing that whatsoever. So know the difference when you should heal and when you shouldn't heal. A good opportunity to heal is if you unhook somebody and someone else comes and you can quickly double heal. Almost anytime there's 2 people that can heal is a great time to heal, and these are options that you need to keep in mind. But again, this rule, it's pretty flexible because if you're playing against an Oni, for example, sometimes healing up will take priority over doing the generators. So use your discretion. Stealth is still a very, very good tactic in DBD. I think a lot of people forget that stealth is really, really good, that you can use it to your advantage. Hiding in plain sight works significantly well. You can just hide by generators, hide around corners, things like that. And if the killers don't see anything moving, they're not going to go for it. They're not going to waste their time looking if you're then in that position. So using stealth can really, really help you out. But don't overdo this either. Don't hide at the edge of the map and just wait until something happens or someone's in chase. You still have to be brave at times. So combine the two of them, be brave and stealthy at the same time. If someone's ever in the basement and you get the unhook, make sure you're sending them out first. Follow them because they have the endurance status effect. If you get hit, you're going to lose a health state or potentially die. If they get hit, they'll just use that endurance status effect, which is much more beneficial. Basic rule of thumb is 99 engages is the way to go. This is what most people do. It's a good counter to Blood Warden, even though you rarely see it, and it gives you more time so the AGC doesn't actually happen. But there's often times where you need to open that gate immediately. For example, if someone is running straight towards you, open up that gate, don't be stingy about it. Or if the killer's standing still for some reason, and they seem that they're about to DC, get out of there, go get your escape points. Rule of thumb though, 99 most of your gates, but use your discretion once again in order to open them when need be. If you're ever at the exit gate and a teammate actually goes down at the exit, start healing them. This forces the killer to hit you instead because they can't pick up the survivor. This is known as the heal tech. It gives the survivors extra time to crawl while the killer is actually cleaning their weapon, and sometimes that time is enough for them to crawl out. Most of the windows in a game you can bait. Sometimes killers are eventually going to read this, but it's often a good tactic just to seem like you're going to vault, but don't actually do it, and sometimes you can get the killer to swing. If you have absolutely no pallets, no vaults, nothing to utilize, sometimes jumping into a locker can save you from a good hit. This works especially good against someone like Leatherface, so lockers can actually be your friend in some situations. Whenever you're in chase or in loops, make sure you're using any line of sight blockers. Line of sight blockers are always going to help you against pretty much every single killer in the game. Use this to gain yourself some distance. Don't just run out into bare and open because chances are the killer's just going to mow you down. When you are running, don't actually zigzag. I used to do this for fun because I thought I looked cool, but it actually negates a lot of the distance that you actually make up versus just running in a straight line. So don't zigzag, don't do a bunch of 360s, and as cool as it is, you don't need to moonwalk every single time because this is going to negate the distance that you actually create, and sometimes it can lead to your death. But I mean, if you do want to flex, go ahead and flex. Who's stopping you? If you're ever playing against a ranged killer like the Huntress, Deathslinger, even a Wesker, make sure you're dodging at the last second and not trying to bait them into doing it because they're eventually going to read your bait and just wait for you to cross the middle of their screen and then use their power. So instead, try to anticipate when they're going to use their power. You can tell when the Huntress lifts up her hatchet or the Deathslinger aims his gun and then try to dodge at the very last moment. This is going to net you so much more success. Vault teching is pretty simple. Whenever you go a vault and the killer decides to follow you, basically you run right in between their legs and go out the other way. Because of their FOV lock, they're not going to see you and they're just going to completely lose you. The FOV tech is when you run back into the killer and then continue running the way you were originally running. This sometimes makes them swing in anticipation that you ran behind them because they can't really see you. Shout out to Aaron for the clip. I mentioned flashlights earlier. If you do end up dropping a pallet, whether that's a stun on the killer or they're breaking it, make sure you're flashlighting the killer. Use the flashlight to your advantage. It doesn't always have to be for saves. And when you do this, you can actually just sneak on past the killers. It's better to initially walk past them and then start running. And when they look, they're going to lose you. Most of the times this works. If you want to have some fun, anytime you go against a corner and the killer doesn't have line of sight of you, you can just crouch around it, especially if you trail your scratch marks by running and then slowly walking back and crouching. They're going to think you ran in that direction and then you just run back out and that'll buy you some extra added time. There's a lot of basic tiles in Dead by Daylight that you're going to see, such as the Z wall, the T wall, the L wall, the A wall, the B wall, the C wall, the D wall. You get the point. I'm going to show you guys how to basically loop the most basic one of these. What's the ideal way of doing this? If you remember the tip earlier that I told you, you ideally want to loop where you always get the fast vault and you have good checkpoints. So I'm going to show you some of the basic loops that you can do. I actually saw a really good comprehensive guide that came out recently that I'm going to link down below because they go way more in depth than I could ever do on this without making a full dedicated video. So I'll show you guys some of the basics, and if you want to learn more, I'll leave a link down below to that creator. Crouch tech is something that's still a little bit spotty, but essentially if you're playing against a killer like Hillbilly or even Wesker, sometimes just crouching down, the hitbox doesn't register and they go straight through you. This one is a little bit weird because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So again, use it at your discretion. It's not always going to work, but if you're in a dire situation, try it out. Flashlighting is not super difficult. Your flashlight's pretty much always going to beam in the center of your screen. So if a killer is shorter, just aim a little bit lower. If they're taller, aim a little bit taller. You don't want to actually aim for their head because it doesn't register. You want to go right under their neck, above their chest area. And essentially when you want to light the flashlight up is right when their arm is next to their head. Once you light the flashlight up there, it's super duper easy to do it. I believe the timing is actually a little bit more forgiving now. They have made changes to flashlights, so it's significantly easier to do it. Practice makes perfect. A little bit more of an advanced tip that you can do with the flashlight is what is known as a CJ tech. You can do this with a locker as well, but typically you want to do this with pallets. Essentially, if someone's in the pallet and the killer is not really picking them up because they know someone's around and you got a beamer, use this to your advantage. Basically, have the person stay in the pallet, and once the killer starts chasing you, drop the pallet on them. This will get the stun. You don't need the stun to do this. All you really need to do is to make sure that that person's on the other side of the pallet. Once that happens, all you need to do is revault the pallet. This is going to give the killer the option to only pick up the survivor, so it forces them to pick up the survivor rather than breaking the pallet. You quickly vault back over and start beaming straight into their face, and you got yourself a CJ tech. You can do this at lockers as well. If someone's in a locker, all you do is stay in the locker. When they come over to open the locker because they've seen you run into it, you dash out So this forces them to pick up, you get into the position, you turn on the flashlight, and you get yourself a save. It's easier said than done. These things will take tons of practice, but it's something that you can add into your arsenal, and it's really satisfying when you get. If you're ever looping with a killer and you sense they kind of got bloodlust, start introducing walking into a lot of your chases. Sometimes, especially if you break line of sights, it's actually going to drop chase for the killer and they're going to completely lose their bloodlust. Remember, bloodlust stays only when you're in chase, so walking and crouching, hiding can sometimes lose that chase. There's a lot of times where that's happened to me, and it's something that a lot of the higher MMR survivors incorporate into their gameplay, and this way the killer will not always have bloodlust. My final 2 tips for you are pretty standard. Practice makes perfect with pretty much everything that I've said today. Make sure you're practicing as much as you can. Play with your friends to make it a little bit easier. And the final tip is have fun. At the end of the day, DBD is a fun game if you make it fun. Sometimes it can be infuriating, sometimes it can be frustrating, but it's all about having fun, and fun is subjective, whatever that is to you. So try to have as much fun as you can in the game. I do love DBD, and I want to share pretty much everything that I can to help your experience be more enjoyable. So hopefully I've done that today and improved some of your survivor gameplay. That's pretty much going to do it for me. If you want to support the channel, make sure you're subscribing down below. It really does help. I really want to get to 150,000 subscribers by the end of the I really want to hit 150,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Make sure you guys are also leaving a like and commenting any tips that you know yourself. And don't forget, I'm fully back live streaming on Twitch Monday to Friday. We're going to have a lot of giveaways there as well. It's going to be super duper fun. Hopefully we see you guys there, twitch.tv/theking. And as always, I've been the King. I tip my crown to you guys, and we'll see you in the fog.